It is one of the most life-altering messages that you can receive, that you have cancer. It is like an existential slap. And all of a sudden, I'm not the one going in and solving the problem and helping. I'm the one that needs a lot of help right now. And that's difficult. That's being really vulnerable when your job requires you not to be vulnerable. You're trained not to be vulnerable.
Today's episode of Minds on the Frontline invites you into a heartfelt and truly human conversation about cancer. It's not just the diagnosis, but also the profound ways it alters our lives, identity, purpose, family, and the meaning of fighting back when you've always been the one saving others. Today we are joined by Dr. Mary Morreale, a psychiatrist specializing in psycho-oncology at the Karmanos Cancer Institute in Detroit, who offers both clinical expertise and personal experience as a cancer survivor. Joining us as a guest co-host is Larry Gambotto, a firefighter, cancer survivor, and the state director of the Michigan chapter of the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. During this episode, we delve into the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis, the strength it takes to accept help, and how we can truly show up for others fighting these battles. We also discuss practical support, survivor's guilt, end-of-life planning, and why vulnerability may be our greatest strength. Minds on the Frontline is brought to you by the Frontline Strong Together 5 program, providing 24/7 mental health and crisis support for Michigan's first responders and their families. For more on FST5, including free resources and how to connect, check the episode description and follow us on social media. Thank you and enjoy the show. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
I can't complain. I'm here.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, it's good to see you again,
Good
Larry.
to see you again, Larry.
Good to be seen, right?
Yeah,
Better
absolutely,
be seen
brother.
than viewed,
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Mary. We just recently met online, virtually, and now it's actually face-to-face. And it's always interesting when you finally get to actually meet people like, oh, look at that. You're human. It's not just some voice in a video screen. You're actually not an AI person. So
I'm not an AI person, no.
So please tell everybody what you do, where you do it, all your background, all that good stuff.
My name is Mary Morreale. I am a physician here at the Department of Psychiatry at Wayne State, and I do my clinical work primarily at the Karmanos Cancer Center, where I've been for, I think, maybe 12 or 13 years.
Pretty well-known cancer center, especially in Southeast Michigan, the Detroit area.
It's a great place, and people really are dedicated to helping patients there.
Yeah. We're lucky in, especially Southeast Michigan, it seems like the amount of resources for any medical ailment you have is very robust.
Mm-hmm.
You're very close by, which helps.
I can attest to that.
Yes.
Right.
And it leaves you with a lot of choices.
Yes.
Which can be complicated when you have so many choices.
So why psychiatry and why psycho-oncology?
So psychiatry is one of the core clerkships that we do when we're in medical school. So any physician that you go to has done some period within psychiatric care. It's one of the basics of what we need to learn. And when I was in medical school, it's interesting looking back on life, how you get to where you get, and you don't realize that there's this kind of mysterious process happening. And I was between psychiatry and my other thought was that I could potentially do pediatric hematology oncology, which is interesting because I ended up as a psychiatrist who's working with cancer patients. And for me, psychiatry, it just felt like the right place. I followed my intuition, which I always encourage people to do, and it felt like home to me. I also knew that I wanted to be a mom and that was going to be an equally important part of my life. And I wanted to make sure that in my career, I could have options to also be a primary parent.
Depending on what road you go down in the medical world, you may not be available to people for a while, and how deep you can go too. With these fellowships, sometimes you're 12 years into being a doctor before you're kind of off doing your thing, right? So that's really cool. Now, why specifically into the type of oncology that you're helping people in that way?
So that is has a personal component to it. So when I was in my early 40s, I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. I had 2 little kids at the time, 7 and 9. My husband is a physician, and it was just something that, rattled our family to its core. So I had actually been considering doing a fellowship in hospice and palliative care. I was always interested intellectually and emotionally to end of life. And I was in discussions about doing that fellowship before I got sick. I was out for a period of time doing multiple surgeries, chemotherapy. And then I returned and spoke to the individual who runs a hospice and palliative care program at Wayne State. And he encouraged me to start with just being a psychiatrist within Karmanos. And it was a much needed position. And for me, it was very meaningful. So I decided to continue with that rather than doing a formal fellowship and kind of shifting my focus into a more medical part of cancer care.
Wow. You took a lot of thought to get that, and I think that's very important. It shows your thoughtfulness of really picking out and planning all that out. That's really cool.
And it, like I said, it sort of all makes sense in hindsight. I was sort of moving in that direction by some things that I could control, some things that I couldn't.
Yeah, you kind of went with the flow.
I went with the flow.
And it led you here.
Yeah.
Now, how about you, Larry? Now, tell everybody a little bit more why you're here specifically, and also give them your background professionally.
So professionally, I'm the training captain and health and safety officer for the Rochester Hills Fire Department. I've been with the Hills almost 19 years, been a firefighter for 23-ish. But my journey to here started in 1999 when I was diagnosed with leukemia. I had a bone marrow transplant in 2000. Kind of what put me into the fire service. My donor was a New York City firefighter. My dad was a Detroit cop. 9/11 happened, history of service in my family, and it was the right thing. It's like you said, it's what was the calling and what felt right and what led me into the fire service. And then from there, especially in my roles as a health and safety officer, I get very involved in taking care of our people in our department, which is extended then out to other departments and other people in the region, and then led me to other places. Firefighter Cancer Support Network, I'm their state director here. So I've gotten involved with any member that contacts and reaches out that receives a cancer diagnosis. And also that's kind of led me down the road of peer support. The department kind of pushed me that way too, and that's how I met these guys. And it all comes together. So it's an interesting day. I'm very excited to be here. And
You said your donor was a New York City firefighter. How were you able to meet your donor, and how was that when you finally got to meet him?
So it was great. I mean, it's hard. It's so funny because, and you're here, Mary, it's interesting. Like, cancer sucks, right?
Sucks.
Exactly. Episode 17, go back, check it out. Right?
Yeah, you're right.
Cancer sucks.
Cancer does suck.
In the episode description.
Yeah. And it's the worst thing that I think you could ever hear. Maybe now one of my kids, I wasn't married, I didn't have any kids at the time, but it's like, what else are you going to tell me that's going to rattle me any more than that? I went into U of M in June of 2000. I was there for 30 days. I went through my transplant, right? Got my bag, 2 bags of marrow. I got supersized. Came out of that. Everything was textbook, is good, right? And as far as transplants go. And so when I came out of that, I received a few letters from people in New York. I didn't know that at the time where they were at, but from my donor and his family. I literally received one letter that had like words cut out of it. It was the funniest thing. It was a handwritten letter, and they cut the words out of it. They redacted it. So, and then after a year, they ask you, do you want to meet, do you agree to meet your donor? And if your donor agrees, then they can release information. And we did that. And so that was, June of 2001, July of 2001. And I called and, called out to New York, Islip Terrace, which is out on Long Island. And this lady gets on the phone and, hi, Larry. And, oh, yeah, Joe's working. He's on duty. And half hour later, I get a phone call from Joe, who's my donor. He's a New York City firefighter. He was on duty that day. And he stepped out and gave me a call. And we talked. And, I was intrigued. I was, like I said, just growing up, always military service in the family, my dad being a cop. All these things. So I was really into it when it happened, right?
And that was pre 9/11.
That was pre 9/11. So we started to make plans. My wife and I, we were engaged at the time, and we started to make plans to go out to meet him and his family out in New York. And it's kind of a big deal, right? I mean, it was a good story, a feel-good thing. My transplant was textbook, they kept telling me, right? So they really wanted to push that out there. So we talked about it, and we were looking at the fall of 2001 initially. And then obviously 9/11 happened. Now he was in a firehouse in Brooklyn, so he wasn't in Manhattan, got held up at the bridge. And he would call. I would touch base with him every week or so. We're working 24s, we're doing everything we can, we're this and that, and we're sleeping at the firehouse, and just crazy, right? And, we're working on, 24 on, 24 off, and brought me into it and into a especially unique perspective of what happened with that, right? So then finally in February of 2002, we were able to get out there. They met us at the airport. They made a big deal, though, the next day, a press conference at the firehouse. all the brass was there. It was funny. He got up and make a speech, and he's like, I never thought I'd be in a room with this much brass without my union rep. And, it was kind of funny, right? So fireman joke. And, they made a big deal out of it. All the New York media was there, and people from the New York Blood Center, and, a bunch of pictures and articles that I still kind of have. And it really impressed me. Probably the thing that stuck with me most is one of the members of the piper and drum band, right? He's up there tuning up his bagpipe, and he goes, this is the first good thing we've gotten to do since 9/11.
Yeah.
Oh, dude.
So that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
There was a couple other things there. We talked about the kitchen, right? And the food the firefighters cooked. There was an episode in the kitchen that really drew me in and cemented like, hey, this is where I need to be, right? Mm-hmm. So, I came back, and then later that year I got on to, started running got on paid on call on Novi, and a couple, 3-4 years later after medic and all that stuff, got hired by Rochester Hills. And
here we are today.
Here we are today, right?
Here we are.
All right.
Well, good. That kind of sets the stage a little bit on you guys, but I think we need a little update from Mike to kind of also help us set the stage.
My dad, 12 years ago, was diagnosed with leukemia. He also went through a bone marrow transplant, became in remission, and then 6-7 years later, they came back and he had leukemia again. So he went through another bone marrow transplant. Actually, at Henry Ford, they're like, not many people get 2 bone marrow transplants. The first one almost killed him. Mm-hmm. He was on a vent at one point. He coded. He got through that one. He got through the second one. A year after he got cleared from leukemia, he got lung and liver cancer as well. So he's currently fighting that right now. So I come more from the family member mm-hmm. or the, helping take care of him. It's nothing compared to fighting it, but the family also takes a huge role on once that happens. So it's been a 12-year process.
Yeah. Yeah. And my mother went through a pretty rough battle with breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And it tried to kill her. And she's had 2 smaller battles with cancer. And then she seems to beat all of these things. So I think all of us have a very nuanced perspective to get into this. And Doc, you're really here to kind of steer the ship a little bit on helping us understand and navigate this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So let's start off with, from your experience in psycho-oncology, what are some of the mental and emotional challenges that people face when they get a cancer diagnosis? And as a little bit of a follow-up for your question, how may that differ for people in the first responder community?
It is one of the most life-altering messages that you can receive, that you have cancer. And there's a term that we use in psychology, that it is like an existential slap. So all of a sudden you're aware, like, I really am not immortal. I could die from this. And it's just coming to terms with that. Particularly, I think there's somewhat of a difference when you're younger, right? Because you're not expecting that. As we age, we kind of understand the process of this. Really can change your trajectory from that point out. And I think particularly in the beginning when you receive the news, it's, again, that just shock, that how do I process this? How do the people around me process this information? I would say, given that sort of existential nature, I think one of the biggest fears would be that you will cease to exist. Fear of death, fear of leaving your loved ones, your family, your job, your sort of place in society because of this thing that you are unable to control.
That's the gut punch that everybody talks about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That second, I remember sitting in the room with my dad when they finally told him that's what it was. The world stopped moving and the air got sucked out of the room. And that's just from a family member's perspective. That's not coming from the person who's actually dealing with it.
I will certainly never forget the moment. And I can go back and, like, you can probably place yourself there and remember.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And Larry, from your perspective as a first responder, your cancer diagnosis was pre-service.
Right.
But you've had enough time to kind of look at this and think about it. You're a big part of the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. How might these experiences differ for those first responders and their families?
We know what causes cancer now in firefighters. Mm-hmm. We understand that. We also understand the things that we can do to prevent it and to, put it off. But in reality, the IFF will tell you 3/4 of the members that are passing are dying from occupational cancer. So the numbers are there. Now, we're trying to educate people earlier on, and I think we're getting this, and the same with behavioral health. When we came into the service, it was like, here's your gear, kid, shut up, and we'll talk to you in 2 years when we're ready, right?
Oh, yeah. Or wait till your gear is all salty and covered in soot, and your helmet's blackened, and
then you've earned that you're right to be here and to be part of this, right?
Yep.
So now we're educating everybody, or hopefully earlier on, so that they can understand that this is going to happen, odds are, and here's what you can do to take care of yourself.
I think also thinking about what first responders do is they are the people that go into the problem. And so there's sort of a need to kind of separate oneself from their vulnerability. In order to be able to do that, you have to kind of disconnect to some degree about what could happen, right? When you're running into a dangerous situation. And so there's a role shift, and all of a sudden, I'm not the one going in and solving the problem and helping. I'm the one that needs a lot of help right now. And that's difficult. That's being really vulnerable when your job requires you not to be vulnerable. You're trained not to be vulnerable.
And I think the other portion of it that makes it harder as a first responder is how many of those medical runs do we go on for the cancer patient at home? You know what I mean? Or the hospice patient at home.
We've seen the effects of it.
We see what the end result is right in front of us.
Almost daily.
Yes.
So, I think that's a little harder for first responders too, is we know what the end of that road looks like.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's no mystery there.
Right. And I think sometimes that might even get worse sometimes in our outlook and how we feel when it's somebody we love and know that we work with.
Yes, because you know what that's going to look like down the road. They may not know, but you have that idea of this is what it's going to, this is the road.
That's the other part of this experience you can kind of lean on is that unfortunately Mike's department has lost 4, 5 people to cancer in the last decade.
Yeah.
I mean, these one right after the other. And so unfortunately, they know what to do when it happens based on true experience.
Yeah, and I think there's a similarity in medicine. We're kind of talking, and I'm realizing how much we have in common. It's too much information, that you actually are able to kind of look ahead and recognize some of the potential truths here.
Yeah.
This is one thing, and it's a hard thing to talk to people about because at the time, when you get the diagnosis or you get the information that your loved one, coworker, whatever it might be, has cancer, right? Everybody wants to help. Everybody's, what can I do? What can I do? What are some real world helpful ways that you can support not only the person, but the family of the person going through cancer, but without overstepping your bounds?
Well, so I think that offering specific help is much better than saying, let me know if you need any help, because most people don't feel comfortable saying, can you help me with this? So,
or they may not even know.
Or they may not even know.
Yeah.
So I think that the way that I look at it is to offer practical support. Let me pick up your kids after school. Can I bring you dinner tomorrow? If tomorrow doesn't work, which day next week? Can I send my teenage son over to mow your lawn? Just this basic stuff that is so meaningful when you're going through that, not only from a practical standpoint, but from a standpoint of you are loved, and this is how I'm going to express my caring for you. And it doesn't even have to be with that much effort. Like even cards, like when I was going through my cancer experience, I put all the cards up, I taped them by my back door. I would walk in and think, oh my gosh, like people love me. And that's sort of that's the lemonade of the cancer journey. I would never wish it on anyone, but that is the lemonade, is you really understand, oh my gosh, people care about me.
I kind of chuckled there, Doc. You said, I would never wish it on anybody. But in the other sense of it, the things that came out and people that I met and things that I've saw and know that people cared about me and were there to help was just amazing.
Amazing. And I didn't see it before on that level.
Right.
Like it really has changed my entire life. So from 40 on, I got this sort of different way to look at life.
It's a new perspective.
New perspective that I would have never had if this didn't happen to me.
Well, I think you can go through a lot of trials that aren't cancer to give you that same thing. We all go through these things that uncontrolled, or maybe they were controlled and you made a mistake. But I think you're pointing out is, and you tell me, psychiatrist, taking the stance of looking at it from a learning perspective is probably one of the healthier things you can do.
And you can't do that in the beginning. Like you just can't see it for that in the beginning. And so I don't think that we want to go in and say to someone who was just diagnosed or in the early stages of treatment, you're going to grow from this. This may be a
Right.
blessing, because that just feels like it's minimizing how horrible
It's
it
almost
is.
patronizing. Oh, you're
Yeah,
going to be better
you're
in the
gonna be
long
fine.
run. No, right, because we don't know yet, depending
Yeah.
on what the diagnosis is and everything else. But maybe it's almost like a little footnote at the end of the conversation of, hey, this could be the thing that makes you stronger, rather than a leadoff hitter. That's something, a little cherry on top that maybe some people get to live through.
Or maybe pointing out the things that you see are actually developing in this loved one or friend or whatever, that you can see kind of the growth happening. Like, I see this shift in you from this experience, and I really admire it. I admire your strength. I admire your courage. And again, that maybe is also something that's different with first responders, where you identify with that. We have a lot of courage. We are very resilient. And that could be also something to tap into as someone is going through their cancer journey. Like, you are someone who is inherently courageous and resilient.
And I think that's a really good advice is, cancer chose somebody who can fight back almost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big deal mentally. And your body's going to respond to some degree to all of your positive thoughts.
Yeah. And that's one way that I looked at it. And I'm not deeply, faithful, but I have my faith, and like, he's not going to give me anything more than I can't handle. And I'm here for a reason. This is where I'm going, and it's for something. And it was weird. Just like we would go to a call, though, right? We get a call, and what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? What's next? Where do we go from here? Okay, well, that's done. The fire's out. Now we got to right? We understand these things, these steps that we take. And for me in my journey, that was like, okay, well, now that explains why I have felt so bad for the last month and a half. Now what's the next step, right? What's the next thing? What's the next hurdle? Where do I got to go from here? And for me, like I said, after my diagnosis, it became that. And then I knew what I could focus on and understanding where I had to go to do the next thing, right?
So, and that brings up a really interesting point, because in cancer diagnosis and treatment, it's interesting because that stage, when you're looking at the next steps, this is what I have to do next. I have to do chemo. I have to do radiation. I'm going to have this surgery. I'm going to be in recovery. People tend to do better during that period than they do when remission comes and then the immediate period after that. So like the year after you're out of treatment and looking at next steps, because then you're kind of left in the woods. You're going to the doctor less often. Feels like people are keeping less of an eye on you medically, and that can be a really scary period.
Yeah.
I know it was for me, and I see it in patients. It's that period of, okay, I'm through treatment, but is this going to come back? And what does that mean if this comes back?
That was always a big fear for all of us. My dad went in remission, but is this ever going to come back again? It was almost, it had that feeling of, I can't actually take a breath. You made it through the cancer, you made it through all the treatments, but there's always that little bit of stress hanging on that's like, that in the back of your mind. Like,
Yeah.
which scan is going to show, or what blood work, or what, and I can speak from a family member perspective. Every time he went to go do a CAT scan, a blood work, whatever, until those results came back, it was like we started all over again. You know what I mean? And
yeah. And you were expecting, at least the way that I would go into it. And I think you brought up something about or you brought up something about positive thinking. I can't remember, going into those scans, I actually really had a hard time with positive thinking. My mindset was like, okay, I'm preparing for the worst. Like, this is going to be the steps that I take if it comes back with evidence of a reoccurrence. And I would feel so bad about having negative thoughts, because I was under the impression, like, Mary, you have to keep positive thoughts. This will be helpful for your health. You can't let that stuff get into your mind. I found that personally very hard to
but you're human.
navigate. I'm human.
You're human.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think for me, after that is in the change that came into me after my treatment was, I just wanted to live every day, right? I wanted those that I loved and people around me to know that I love them, and that if I can make a difference for somebody, then and so it was just one day at a time. And I say this quite often, like, well, how's it going today? Well, the feet hit the floor, right? And there were some days in the hospital that I don't remember, and I don't know that I got out of bed. So one step at a time, one day at a time. And I think we've all gone through our journeys, right? Your journey with your dad, our journey through cancer. They're different, but yet we share things together. And so just that helped me to get through that. It's just that one day. What did we do today? Let's get through today, and then we'll worry about tomorrow when we get there, right?
Right.
You worry about what happened today.
Yeah.
You worry about what's going to happen tomorrow, and you literally take it 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time.
One treatment at a time.
That's it. Like, you can't look ahead. It's whatever's right in front of you.
Yeah.
So with that, there's still stuff to do, right? Like you said, the kids got to get picked up. dinner's got to get on the table, homework's got to get done, all this stuff, right? So when you're the spouse of somebody with cancer, that person's going to take on a lot more responsibility. So, Doc, do you have any advice for those people in that kind of situation, both on the one who's sick and then the other one who's kind of picking up the slack, for lack of a better term?
And I think it's equally difficult, to be that individual that's picking up the slack. And what can happen is that, the individual who is going through the experience can have this perception of everybody's caring for me and everybody loves me, but that might not be extended to the caregiver. And I think we really do have to look at this like a family illness, that this is the entire family going through it, parents, spouses, siblings, children. It's really difficult for the whole family unit. And extending that same kind of support to caretakers is important. Yeah. And to children, to think about people who have cancer and have young children. It's a very scary experience. And what can we do as adults to make children understand that they're loved and cared for and supported through this journey?
Taking care of the caretakers is just as important as taking care of the person with cancer. I watched my mom for years, and luckily we have a pretty close family and everybody chips in and does their thing. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, my mom's his primary caretaker. And you watch them get stressed out because they feel like they can't take a break, because if they can't take a break, they're letting the person down, whoever's sick, right? One of the things that I'll have to say for the caretakers is you also have to take time for yourself. It may be as simple as, somebody come over and they go to the grocery store grocery shopping, but give that caretaker that time away because they need that distress. If you're running in the red, something happens to them, who's taking care of the person with cancer, right? So if you're a caretaker out there, please take some time, do whatever you need to do, whether it's, go shopping, go take a walk, whatever it might be. Take the time for yourself. You're not doing anything less for the person who's sick. They understand it. Larry, am I wrong here?
You're right on, right. And that's also like one of the things with Fire Cancer Support Network, when I reach out to somebody that reaches out to us and we talk about it, it's just as much about their spouse, and that there's resources for the spouses to talk to, or the caregiver, I should say, whoever that person is. Yeah. Right. There's other caregivers out there for people to talk to. During mine, I was still younger, so was my mom, but it took care, wanted to make sure there was things for her and there was opportunities. And I know just as much as we talk about all the things that's there for patients, there's things there for the caregivers, and it just, hopefully they take advantage of it, and that we think about it too in that sense, right? Having a list of ideas of what is it we might need, right? And I tell people that when I talk to them, I'm like, hey man, you're going to have a whole bunch of stuff going on. What can people do for you? So you, like you said, be specific in what you offer, or hey, this is what we might need. Think about it now, right? And then, taking care of the caregivers is just as big as taking care of the patient. Yeah,
it's the oxygen mask analogy. That person has to have their oxygen mask on first. Yeah. Yep. I think the other thing to be realistic about is the financial burden that can happen because of a serious medical illness. I don't know the details of how this works in the first responder world, but most people have a significant reduction, if not loss, of their salary. And so I think that that's another really helpful thing to do. The GoFundMes, the having, it could be a bake sale that,
bring dinner once a week.
Whatever it can be to kind of take that burden away from the family.
And one thing I know here in the state of Michigan, and Larry, you could probably talk about it a little more, is the cancer presumption that we have here to help pay for a lot of the things. Do you want to touch on that for a minute?
Sure. Thanks for bringing that up. The Chris Slezak First Responders Fund, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but Chris Slezak was a Sterling Heights firefighter. Him and I had the same diagnosis.
Okay.
And everything that could go right with the transplant was mine, and everything that could probably go wrong was Chris's. I met Chris just before his transplant. It was probably, 05, 06, actually maybe 07, somewhere in there. So I'd been out a ways. But I'm honored, and I try to remember Chris whenever I can, and any of the opportunities I get to speak about it. But there is a cancer presumption fund here in the state of Michigan that does cover firefighters and other first responders. There's some rules that go with it. You have to be on a certain amount of time, and it has to be certain diagnosis, although it pretty much covers pretty much all the cancers that are out there. And so one of the biggest things that when I receive somebody from Firefighter Cancer Support Network looking for assistance is making sure that they reach out to the fund at the state. And I know the lady at the state, Tammy, she refers people to us. And then the third component of that is we have a friend, Joe Warren, who does Neighbors United, does the Walk for the Red every year. He can help financially. So we've kind of come at a 3-pronged approach whenever we hear of firefighters that are reaching out, and not everybody's going to take every opportunity to use those resources that are out there, but I'm at least going to make them available and aware of them, right?
Using what you have to kind of soften the burden you're taking on, right?
So hopefully that financial component of that is a lot less. Now, what you said about fundraising, and we did all kinds of different things, and we had a friend who was a hairdresser, and like she shaved all my uncles and my dad's heads because, and they paid to do that. It was a fundraiser, and the fun stuff, that we kind of put into that, right? I bleached mine blonde. I don't have a lot of pictures from cancer, but I have this one picture where I'm just blonde platinum, so,
going back to the family members and offering support, it sounds like you have this within your support network where there is support groups, formal support groups for family members. And I know some of the other organizations in the community also do that. Like at Carmanos, we have support groups for families. I know at Gilda's Club, it's the same thing. So, trying to get people into those resources that exist. And I think one of the most important things when you're in a support group is that you understand that the experience that you're going through is normal and you're not alone. Like other people are feeling what I'm feeling. And it was, before we were talking about walking in a room and just understanding somebody because of shared experience. And that's what happens when you're a part of a support group.
Absolutely. I think it's a huge asset to have those and get into those, because unfortunately we run on cancer patients in various stages of where they're at. How do you guide patients, whether, family, friends, the actual patient, through the fears around kind of the death and the end of life issues that go on?
Well, again, going back to the idea of normalizing, I don't think that there's any human being. I mean, there may be some exceptions of people who have a very strong belief about what might be afterlife that don't have anxiety about death. So a very well-known psychiatrist who writes for non-psychiatric audiences, his name is Irving Yalom, and I think he's in his late 90s. He wrote a book called Staring at the Sun, which is a book about fear of death in humans. And so if you kind of think of the title, none of us really want to look at this, right? We know we can't look at the sun. We find it very difficult to think about the end of our life. And it's something that we go through life avoiding thinking about, and that's supported by our culture. We're not a culture that really takes a deep acknowledgement of our own mortality. So I think one of the most helpful things to do, and this doesn't have to be done by a medical professional, a psychiatrist, it can be a friend, a family member, is to ask what the person is specifically afraid of. You may find that they're not afraid of death, but they're afraid of pain at the end of life. And to make it clear or to support the fact that we do a pretty good job of managing pain at the end of life, and that, particularly with hospice and palliative care, that can be very well managed. It's a little bit more difficult when somebody will say, I'm afraid of non-existence. I don't know what happens after I die, and that's very frightening to me, because none of us have the answer for that. But that's an opportunity to say, I get it. I have the same feelings. And this is part of the pain of being a human, is that we're able to recognize that our life is final.
What advice do you have to the families who are now left behind? Now they have somebody missing at the table this year. What kind of things do you say to them to help normalize, or not even normalize, but get them through that after effect?
So I think that, grief doesn't have any rules and regulations. So it is such an individual experience for each person that goes through it. So I think, again, that essence of normalization, like acknowledging someone's pain, creating space where they can feel comfortable coming to you when they're in emotional distress, and simply being there. And again, those practical things too, right? It's not that the pain is over once the cancer is over, because in this situation, you lost somebody, and recognizing that those practical steps, like helping people out where you can in a specific manner, needs to continue for some time.
Nowadays, we have peer support, and peer support is fairly new, but it's very close to what you talk about when you talk about the support groups.
It really is a support group system.
It is a support group system.
Non-specific to ailment.
We always think about peer support when it comes to bad runs and things like that, but I think there's a place for this when it comes to the cancer diagnosis, not only for the person with cancer, but also the family who's living with it as well. And being it's so new, we don't necessarily have a playbook for this yet. unfortunately, it's happening more and more. What advice would you give to some of those peers and peer support teams so they can approach not only, the person, the coworker, but also all the coworkers at their department, at their place of business, or whatever it may be, to normalize this for those people? It's not necessarily the person going through cancer or the family, but it's also the coworkers.
So, and again, I think there's a specificity for first responders because my sense of the community is that it's a community that's built on stoicism. And so I think the default would be to, I can handle this. We don't need to talk about it. Let's go to the next thing that we have to do. But I do think that this is a time to kind of put that aside and recognize that it's important to talk about the feelings behind it. And doing that in a community, makes it so much more palatable because we're experiencing it together and getting through it together. So I think making a concrete plea for people to have comfort in sharing their feelings, have that come from the top down, like, this is hard. This was hard for me. How was this hard for you? And really encouraging people to open up about that and be vulnerable.
While we're just talking here, I just remembered an incident. And this was before I even started doing peer support. My dad basically was up at Henry Ford, Maine. It's an inpatient where all the cancer patients are. I remember sitting in my dad's room. He was in there for almost 200 days one year. So we lived on the cancer floor. Yeah. You want to talk about heroes?
Yes.
Go to a cancer floor.
Yes.
Those are heroes.
Yes. Confirmed.
Yes. And I remember his nurse, because you get to know the nurses. They turn into like family too, right? And I remember her coming in one day and she knew I was a firefighter. She goes, "Hey, there's a guy who's down the hall. He's a firefighter. He just found out he's got cancer, but he won't talk to anybody. He won't come out of his room at all." And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want me to do? I don't know what to do.
Right.
This was way before peer support. And she goes, "Well, can you just go down and talk to him?" Well, I'm thinking, what am I going to say to this guy? I've never met him before. So I go down to the room. He's sitting there and I knock on the door. First off, he's like, "Yeah, can I help you?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm a fireman. Hi."
Right. And he's like, "Great."
I thought at least that would get me in the door.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Long story short, I go in there and I didn't even talk about cancer. Hey, where do you work? He tells me where he works. I'm like, "Oh, what's the next question? Who do you know? And hey, what's your contract look like?"
Yeah. You start
right?
Yeah.
Those are like two opening questions.
Yeah,
you know
right,
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just by doing that and just by talking to him, we talked for probably an hour, but we didn't talk a lick about cancer. The funny part was about a week later, our same nurse came in and she goes, "You will not believe he now talks to everybody. He comes out of his room. He walks around the floor, things like that." So the whole point of bringing this up is for peers and peer support, you don't necessarily have to talk about the cancer. You just have to let them know that they're not alone. You may just be there to talk about the Lions, or it doesn't always necessarily have to be about the cancer to support them.
Well, and
right?
I think that goes right back to what we do with peer support is I may not understand behavioral health or mental health and what's going on in somebody, but hey man, I'm here.
Yes.
Right. And we know that there's resources and there are people out there like Doc here who can help us.
Yes.
Right? Don't be afraid of that, right? I mean, there's help out there, and this is what we do, and this is how we get through this is by being the buffalo. I saw Travis Howes yesterday, and he was talking about the cow and the buffalo. We have to be the buffalo and head things on, run towards the storm and get through it, right? And I think that's where we can go. But this is the resources and the thing. Whatever your storm is, it doesn't matter, right?
Yes, and I don't think you always have to talk about the normalization of this or that. I think you can also just have those conversations about life.
Just talk about normal stuff, right?
Just talk about normal stuff because it brings that normalcy back into that person's life who's lost all normalcy.
Right.
And it got to the point where, I didn't know this guy for more than an hour and a half, and I was making the off-color jokes.
Right, you're doing all the firefighter stuff.
We're doing the firefighter thing, right?
Same clowns, different circus.
Same clowns, different circus.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be a peer supporter to do those things, right?
You just be a person.
You can just be a person.
I think that's
and
a lot of
everybody's afraid to talk about, I don't know what to talk about.
Well, that's what a lot of people, I'm not a peer supporter. It's like, you work here, you're a peer. You're doing the job. Yeah. You can relate to another human being who does a similar task and just hang out.
Yeah.
And there's that, and then there's people that can obviously do a lot more than that.
I think that you pointed out something important, which is allowing that individual to take the lead, right? So you didn't go in there with an agenda. Your only agenda was to just be supportive. And I think that we can, in conversation with people, feel when people want to go into certain territories and when they don't, but really allowing that to happen or to be cognizant of allowing the other person to take the lead.
That's probably a big one, in just feeling in control. Like, you're not having control out of all this stuff, and then just giving them the lead gives them a sense of control in the moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think when I would go up and see my dad or whatever, my whole thing was to try to make him laugh.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's all we know how to do sometimes.
That's
honestly, that's where I go.
But when you think about it,
that's what we're best at, right?
That's what we're best at. Yeah. When you see some of the shittiest situations in life, what is our first?
Oh, you got to make fun of it.
Make a joke.
As a first responder, that was my first thought was, okay, how can I go up there and make him laugh today?
Right.
You know what I mean? Make him at least for 2 seconds. He's not thinking about the chemo that's hanging.
Giggle the cancer out of you.
Exactly. And I think there's some. I honestly think there's some truth to that. Those little moments help, right? That move them forward.
Little things make the big things.
Yes.
Yep. So speaking of which, all those can kind of come to a head when you're doing end of life planning. So what advice do you have for people, for themselves and supporting others in the true end of life stages?
Mm-hmm. I think if we can look at end-of-life planning as a gift to those that we are going to leave behind. So it's taking this burden off of the ones you love, that they're not going to have to make these decisions that are important for you and for your value system. So I think that looking at it that way, recognizing that this isn't easy for anybody. Again, we don't want to stare at the sun, right? But if you can realize and recognize that this is going to be something that helps your family, I think it sort of shifts the focus. I'm doing this as a gift to my husband, as a gift to my children.
Does that early planning relieve any levels of anxiety? Does it help? You're saying it's a gift, so is it also kind of like relieving a lot of the stress that we got here, and now we can kind of focus on those things?
Absolutely. And I think that that's how it is potentially the gift to the individual that's making that planning, is that you are able to kind of think about what you want and how you want to live the rest of your life. And no one knows how long that's going to be. So it has to be, something that is, again, talking about control, that sort of gives somebody control over the situation. This is how I want this to look like. I think that can be very important and meaningful for the individual who's doing that planning. And I think that we can all think about things that we would want, right? So you can relate. Like I know that there's things that you want it to be a party.
I want it to be a big party. Yeah. I want everybody to have fun, celebrate my life, that I was here, that I've made impact. And if it's 10 people, I want you to celebrate it.
Yeah.
Big party.
I'm the same way if everything ever happens to me.
Yeah.
I want a party.
Big party.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Mike, you've witnessed a number of your coworkers, as we said before, go through cancer diagnosis. This does show us not only are we human, but we are very aware that first responders have a much higher rate of cancer. How does it make the personnel that you work with feel about getting cancer, knowing so many, not only nationally we're seeing it, but it's in your face?
I think it's just that. It's in your face. And I think everybody takes a step back and goes, okay, I'm not invincible.
What are you guys doing to kind of combat the possibilities of what's going on?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is, we start following the cancer initiatives. Yeah. You see people now, 5 years ago, you didn't see people diligently come back from a fire and clean their gear. No. Or
on-scene decon.
Just gross decon.
Big tough fireman wipes.
Exactly, right? So, like me personally, I carry the wipes in my bag.
And for Doc and those listening that aren't firefighters, a lot of our cancer comes from the fact that we end up with a lot of junk on our neck from being inside, and there's a lot of glands in there you can absorb. So we're really cleaning our necks really well.
Neck,
on the
head,
scene.
arms,
it's
armpits.
The weakest part of our ensemble is our neck, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And plus your skin here is thinner. I mean, you're a doctor, you understand that, but it's thinner, so there's more crap. Yeah, so we'll pull out literally.
They're cleaning wipes.
Well, they are, but originally they were butt wipes. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is an interesting thing, because again, this is something unique to your community.
Yes.
Which is, there could potentially be a lot of feelings about choosing a profession that put you at risk for this disease that you're now facing by yourself and with your family. And what does that mean? And I think other people can relate to this as well. I mean, no human being lives a perfectly healthy life. And I know, at least when I was diagnosed, I really went back and took an inventory, like, oh, I did this and this must have caused that. And why did I ignore this? And with firefighters, you have this additional piece, right? That you're in a profession that is putting you at increased risk. And what does that mean?
I think for a lot of us, it's the day you start, you realize you could not come home one day. But I think also it's in the back of our heads now more than ever that cancer is also, we know that's a risk of the job, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
That specific risk becomes more and more real the older I get.
Yes.
Just because you're seeing more of it, you're becoming more
Yes.
responsible.
You're
You have
losing more
kids,
friends
people rely
from it.
on you. All the things, right? When
Yeah.
you have this romantic view of, yeah, the job is dangerous. But then you don't think about all the things like, yeah, falling through the floor, being shot at, all the things. Those are bad
Well,
enough. Like
and
the
I look
invisible boogeyman of cancer.
Well,
That's a tough one.
I look at those as things that are out of your control, right?
All right.
And when you start looking at the cancer portion of it, I can't control if a roof is going to collapse, right?
Correct.
I can't control if the room is going to flash. I can't control those things, right? But what I can control are just what you were talking about.
Diet, cleanliness.
Wearing your gear, washing your gear, wearing your SCBA, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Right.
these are the things we know that you can control.
Take a shower as soon as you get
Shower
back.
within the hour. Yeah.
Shower within the hour. Like I said, I carry the wipes in my bag, and everybody on my crew does it on scene. We all pretty much have 20 years here. Half of our career, we didn't have that.
Wash your gear was the only rule.
Yes.
And why are you taking a shower? We got work to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But a certain point forward, I can take control of it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
There's a little bit there.
Yes.
And also recognizing that we can do the best that we can, but cancer still might impact us. Remember, this is something that happens to children.
Yes.
So I guess what I'm trying to point out is that recognizing that there could be this guilt associated with what did I do? Did I do something wrong? Could I have cleaned my stuff better? Could I have, whatever it may be, that can be imperfect.
Absolutely.
I got a question for you, Doc. You just mentioned guilt. Is there any survivor's guilt that goes with that, right? We get a diagnosis of a member and they're out with cancer and it's like, well, I was on the same fire.
Yeah.
I ate the same food. I've done the same things and I'm okay here, right? Not that I have a whole lot of it, but I think of Chris quite often. We had the same type of cancer. And, I try to remember him, but yeah, that guilt aspect that falls into that and what we do and who we are and why them and not me, right?
Absolutely. And I can totally relate to that. There was somebody who I knew from my kids' school who is now suffering from the same cancer that I have. And it is very difficult for me, and it may be going in a different trajectory. And it was difficult. Like, I have that exact feeling. Like, why did I luck out? Because a lot of it was luck, honestly. 25% chance of this going in the other direction. And why did I get that lucky break? And this human doesn't.
So I think that leads me back to now is we have to remember if somebody goes, right? I mean, we're all going to go. We're all going to pass at some point. If one of our brothers or sisters in the fire service goes earlier than expected because of that, we have to memorialize them and remember them. And we do that by getting on the rig and going to the next call, but we have to take care of ourselves, right? And how we do that. Probably the same thing is different than a family is we still have to pick up and remember that person and again, honor that they lived and why they were here and the impact they had on us. And
so you're pointing to to legacy, and that's one of the ways that we can also help people as they're approaching end of life, like really trying to help them connect with meaning and what they want their legacy to be. And in this book that I was referring to before, the Staring at the Sun physician who wrote this book, he calls it the ripple effect. So if you can imagine a stone falling into water, when we were kids and skipping stones, and all those ripples happen, that's how we look at a life. Like, here's your life, it's splashed in the water, and these are all the different things that you impacted. And I think helping someone connect to that when they're going through end of life can help them traverse that, because that's the way that we live on, is through our ripples, and those ripples will never stop.
I think that's great advice. Before we go, the one shout out I want to do is Be the Match. It's now NMDP is the name of it. But if you want to become a bone marrow donor or stem cell donor, you can go to www.nmdp.org. If you want to donate, Larry's here because of a donor. A lot of people are here because of donors. So if you want to go sign up and be a donor, I know I'm on the list. Haven't been called yet, but good place to check out. So I'd like to thank you guys for coming out, sharing your stories,
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
and having a good conversation here today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Minds on the Frontline podcast. We have more great content coming out soon. Please check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. and make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline Podcast social media channels. Thank you, and have a great day.